All right, welcome back to another episode of the Pychopedia podcast. I am your solo host for the day, Investigator Slater, without my co-host for the day, Tank Sinatra. I know we miss him, guys. I miss him so much too. Tank misses all of us so much. He will be back. Today, though, I got your back. It's going to be an absolutely wild case. I don't recommend eating while you're listening to this episode. I know if Tank were here, he'd be like, don't tell people what to do. I'm not telling you what to do. If you want to eat, by all means, eat. If you want to eat before you go on a roller coaster, you can do that too. There's just some things that I would advise doing and some things that I just would caution you against doing. I just don't recommend eating during this case. If it's your first time here, welcome. So happy and grateful to have you. And if it's your 122nd time, welcome home, freak. Obviously, if Tank were here, he would be telling us about some type of Kendrick Lamar chokehold that he's in or something like that. I'm here to tell you that I have been neck deep in true crime research. We have some absolutely insane cases in the pipeline. I haven't been able to pull myself away from my laptop, away from the research, away from reports, police reports, FBI profiles. There's so much that we're going to be covering coming up. So I definitely encourage you to stick with us because it's going to be sick. On that note, I've also been neck deep in a true crime docuseries that released on I think it's Netflix. I'm always wrong when I talk about the network that releases a series, but I'm pretty sure it's Netflix. And it's called Adolescence. We've received a bunch of DMs from you guys on Instagram about covering this series rather. It's a 4-part series. It's beautifully shot. The acting is sensational. It's about a British family whose world is turned upside down when their son appears normal outwardly. He's 13, but really in reality, he's got a whole lot going on behind the curtain, and he is responsible for murdering a girl in his class. So the main character is actually the perpetrator, which is an interesting angle for a series to take. Usually they highlight the victim, which I absolutely understand, but this one they go for the perpetrator because what they're really trying to show in this series is the danger of incel culture. It's really, really fascinating. If you don't know what an incel is, that's okay. It's basically, incels are a subculture of misogynistic men who kind of lurk online and they blame their lack of romantic and sexual prowess on women that they hate. It's really, really interesting. It's really fascinating. It's obviously really, really jarring that that is happening with a 13-year-old. It just makes you think. So anyway, I bring it up because I've been thinking about covering that series on Pychopedia, doing like an actual, I'm not going to say a review of the series, but using that series to kind of kickstart bigger conversations about incel culture, kids, cell phones, social media, all that. If you're interested in hearing that, let me know, and I will get cracking on it. Okay, so before we jump into the case today, I just want to say that on behalf of Tank and I, we would absolutely love it if you could take a moment to leave a rating, a review, subscribe on Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can drop a comment, which would be amazing. Share the podcast with a friend. Word of mouth is the absolute best because it's genuine. And then that's when it really spreads and you're really kind of bringing people into the fold who are like-minded. Basically, somebody whose crime freak matches your crime freak. Because honestly, we just can't do this without your support. If you're craving more of what you love and you're just not getting enough of it here on the public platforms, we've got you covered. Head over to patreon.com/Pychopediapod, where you will get access to a shit ton of extra exclusive content each month. There's behind the scenes stuff. Depending on your tier, there's at least 2 to 5 bonus episodes per month. And for me, the biggest draw, aside from the group chats and it feeling like just a really dysfunctional and the best kind of way family over on Patreon, is you get ad-free episodes the same day they release publicly. So every Wednesday we release, right? Pychopedia Wednesday. If you're on Patreon, you're going to get that same episode, but you're going to get it without ads. So if ads piss you off, we got a place for you. Again, patreon.com/Pychopediapod. And you can come up with a really cool name. You don't have to, by the way. We love you all the same. But I do want to share some of the recent Patreon names because they're just ridiculous. Tank and I screenshot these names. We're like, did you see this? It's absurd. You guys are absurd. First of all, this is one of my favorite ones. Hidey Hole, a.k.a. Butthole. It's a name I could have chosen. It's just ridiculous. To Shado or To Shadon't. Amazing. Obviously, we're ripping off shabusiness in the best way. Finding the tools I have to do the best I can. That's a nod to Tank. Monica Bryan. Lauren Schultz, Talkin' the Devil Talk, which I think that is out of our lesbian vampire episode. I think I said something like she didn't just talk the devil talk, she walked the devil walk, if memory serves correctly. Their Psychopedia during dog walks, which is exactly when I listen to true crime. And the last one I'll say, let's go with Spooky Roads Take Me Home to the Pod I Love, which is poetic and beautiful. And obviously, I sang that in my head. So without further doozy, and that's obviously the Nickelodeon theme because my kids were watching SpongeBob when I was writing this intro, let's get into today's case. In the crisp autumn of 1994, the Chijon family hosted a neighborhood barbecue in the quiet, rural town of Bulgat-myeon, South Korea. Their home sat at the edge of the woods, just far enough from the main road to be forgotten, yet close enough to draw curious neighbors when the scent of delicious barbecued meat drifted through the trees. Locals arrived bearing side dishes and warm smiles, greeted by a mismatched group of hosts who seemed generous, hospitable, even charming in a slightly offbeat kind of way. These were a group of young men who had recently poured their own money and labor into fixing up an old pink farmhouse belonging to one of their mothers. Smoke curled lazily from the barbecue pit, thick with the faintly sweet scent of charred pork. Skewers were passed hand to hand, glistening with grease, their edges blackened and dripping with a richness that clung to skin, to clothing, to memory. Laughter rang out and glasses clinked as children darted through the yard, their little shoes skimming over a truth buried just below their innocent little feet. Because only a few paces from where neighbors stood savoring their meals, half drunk and unsuspecting, was a heavy steel hatch, sealed tight, unnoticed, and beneath that hatch, in the dark, was an industrial incinerator still smoldering, with its heat rising through the earth like a ghost. And inside that smoldering incinerator were the scorched remains of something no one at that gathering could have imagined, and yet many of them were tasting. Because what the Chijon family served that day was not pork, but rather the final course of a nightmare. It was, in fact, the flesh of innocent human beings, kidnapped, tortured, murdered, now grilled, seasoned, and served. This is the case of the Chijon family, aka the Korean Cannibal Clan. The Chijon family, also known as the Chijon family, was a violent South Korean gang that operated briefly but brutally between 1993 and 1994. It was formed by a 27-year-old man named Kim Gi-hwan, who was a manual labor worker and former convict with a deep-rooted hatred for the wealthy. He recruited 6 others to join his vendetta-fueled crusade against the wealthy, a ragtag mix of ex-cons, aimless drifters, and jobless men who, like him, had nothing to lose and a festering grudge to feed. Pun intended. So, while they were not related by blood, the Chijon family didn't just share a vision. They shared a chip on their shoulder and a taste for enacting unimaginable violence. The name Chijon was actually not one that the gang chose for themselves or the family. I'm going to be using the term family and gang interchangeably. It was a title later coined by prosecutors born out of the sheer depravity they unearthed during their investigation. Chijon is derived from the Korean word Chijon, which roughly translates to mean supreme or supremacy, as in the highest, the ultimate, or the one who stands above all others. It's often used in contexts that imply domination, superiority, or godlike status. Prosecutors gave the gang this name to reflect the delusions of grandeur held by its leader, Kim Gi-hwan, and his followers. So they weren't complimenting this gang. They were kind of, almost poking fun at them, but just highlighting what they felt they stood for. Because the gang believed that they were executing a righteous mission that involved cleansing society of the wealthy, whom they viewed as corrupt and undeserving. So, labeling them Chijon was both an indictment of their God complex and a way for authorities to convey or label the ideology behind their horrific crimes. Murders driven not by chaos, but by a warped sense of justice and self-importance. Kim Gi-hwan, however, called his group Mascan, believing, incorrectly, by the way, that it was the Greek word for ambition. It's apparently not a word at all in any language. It was just a hollow invention to somehow dignify a crusade soaked in human blood. The Greek word, by the way, for ambition is philodoxia, so I don't know where they came up with maskan from, but like how ridiculous that he chose a word that doesn't even exist. So let me set the stage for South Korea's economic climate at that time, because it's more than just background noise in this case. It's really, really a strong part of the motive here. We're talking early 1990s, particularly 1993 to 1994, and South Korea was experiencing a period of economic instability and growing disparity, despite coming off decades of rapid development. So throughout the 1980s, South Korea had seen a booming economic growth, often dubbed the miracle on the Han River. But by the early 1990s, that momentum started to slow. GDP growth fell sharply from around 10% in the late 80s to just 2% by late 1992. The early 1990s also saw a global recession, which hit South Korea's export-driven economy very hard. Though official unemployment was still relatively low, underemployment and job insecurity were rising, especially for blue-collar workers/manual laborers. Many former convicts and low-income individuals found themselves shut out of a system that favored elite education and corporate connections. The chaebol class, which were the family-owned corporate conglomerates like Samsung, Hyundai, LG, had grown immensely powerful and visibly rich. There was rising public resentment towards these families and the perception that they were untouchable no matter what economic conditions looked like for average people. So keep that in mind. I specifically mentioned those companies for a reason. Government responses like interest rate cuts, low interest loans, and efforts to boost exports targeted businesses, not individuals. Again, for the working class, these measures felt like bailouts for the rich that left the struggling lower class to fend for themselves. Even if the stimulus is meant to help broadly, it can look like it favors the top tier, especially if the results aren't felt at street level. If you can't get approved for a loan or benefit from the export market, the whole thing starts to look like a rigged game, and one that the wealthy always manages to win. For someone feeling bitter, isolated, and looking for a target, this kind of economic backdrop becomes fertile ground for radicalization. So it was in this context, around a grimy poker table in the sweltering summer of 1993, that 27-year-old Kim Gi-hwan, an ex-convict and manual labor worker, crossed paths with two other like-minded men named Moon Sang-rak, who was 23, and Kim Hwang-yang, who was also 23. Moon Sang-rak was also an ex-convict, and Kim Hwang-yang was a student. Between shuffles and smoke around this grimy poker table, Kim Gi-hwan, who was the leader, went off on how much he despised the wealthy, while citing one particular event as being the impetus for his hatred. Pop quiz. Now, we know Tank is not here to, once again, fail. Sorry, Tank, but it's true, you probably would. But I want to give everybody else a chance to see if they got this, because I know the PQs keep us all on our toes. So, pop quiz. What specific event served as the impetus for his vitriolic hatred of the wealthy? A crooked university entrance exam scandal. B, the boss at his factory hosted a birthday party for his Shiba Inu equivalent to $100,000. Or C, he was escorted out of a luxury department store for quote-unquote looking suspicious and lowering the aesthetic. All right, take 2 seconds, you guys. The answer is A. A crooked university entrance exam scandal served as the impetus for Kim Gi-hwan's absolute hatred of the wealthy. So in the early 1990s, South Korea was rocked by a university entrance exam scandal that exposed deep-seated corruption within the education system. I'm telling you, this scandal was absolutely massive. In South Korea, the university entrance exam, which is the College Scholastic Ability Test, or the CSAT, known as Sunyong, is a high-stakes make-or-break event that largely determines a student's entire future, including career prospects, social status, and even marriage. While it's not mandatory for obtaining a high school diploma, it is critical for attending universities. So students spend years prepping, pulling all-nighters, often attending expensive cram schools. The pressure is so intense that it's been linked to the country's high rates of teen depression and suicide. Each year, around 600,000 students take this grueling all-day test, but only a small fraction score high enough to enter the top 3 universities, seen as a ticket to elite jobs and lifelong stability. Scoring poorly can literally mean being shut out of South Korea's upper class for life. The exam is taken so seriously that on test day, this is crazy, planes are grounded, public transit is silenced, and even the U.S. military halts exercises to ensure silence during the listening portion of the exam. In terms of the scandal or scandals that served as the straw that broke the camel's back for Kim Gi-hwan, in 1990, 9 examiners were arrested for accepting payments totaling $170,000 from applicants' parents to influence admissions at Seoul National University's Music College. Similarly, in 1991, faculty members at Ewha Women's University and Konkuk University were implicated in fraudulent admissions practices. This breach of meritocracy ignited widespread public outrage, particularly amongst individuals from less privileged backgrounds who viewed education as a vital pathway to upward mobility and their almost only way up and out from where they were. As a younger man, Kim Gi-hwan had aspirations of higher education, but due to his family's dire financial issues, those aspirations fell apart, forcing him into manual labor in the factories of Seoul and Busan. The scandal intensified his existing resentment towards the wealthy elite, whom he perceived as architects of an unjust system that marginalized the underprivileged. So by the end of this poker game, galvanized by a sense of injustice and a mutual disdain for the affluent and a shared desire for retribution, the 3 formed the Chijon Family. And as their mutual resentment crackled beneath the surface like a live wire, this gang went on to orchestrate a series of heinous crimes targeting wealthy individuals, driven by a warped ideology that sought to punish those they held responsible for societal inequities. Because these men didn't just see themselves as poor, they saw themselves as deliberately excluded by a corrupt system that favored the rich and discarded the rest. So this was the Chijon family's manifesto. 1, we hate the rich. Pretty straightforward. 2, any traitors must be killed. 3, never trust a woman, not even your own mother. Incel much? That's probably why I felt compelled to talk about the Netflix series Adolescence in the intro, because there is a lot of that innuendo going on here in this case, which you'll go on to see. Through kidnapping and extortion, their mission was to amass a total fortune of 1 billion won, which at the time would have been equivalent to 1.25 million US dollars, which in today's dollars would be approximately 2.6 million. Funny that, right? After declaring war on the wealthy, their real ambition was to become exactly that, wealthy themselves. But not by building anything, not by earning it. Their path to riches was rape, murder, and plunder. Less revolution, more hypocrisy bathed in brutality. So now at this point, the 3 fucketeers began expanding their operation, recruiting bitter, broke, and barely holding it together men from factory floors and construction sites. Many were formerly incarcerated, and all of them were angry. And that's exactly what Kim Gi-hwan was looking for. Not just foot soldiers, but men with chips on their shoulders and nothing to lose. 20-year-old Baek Byung-ok, 21-year-old Kang Dong-un, 20-year-old Kang Moon-sub, and 18-year-old Sang Bang-un all joined the family. After pooling together all the money that they had, the freshly minted all-boy gang purchased an impressive collection of illegal weapons off the black market, which included 6 rifles, a submachine gun, a gas gun, a short-range firearm, a pistol, 1 sword, 1 hunting knife, an electric cattle prod, a shit ton of dynamite, 2 vehicles, including a truck and a car, walkie-talkies, and the aforementioned small pink farmhouse previously belonging to one of their mothers located in a remote area of Byonghyeon. Oh, so interesting. I thought women, even moms, couldn't be trusted, but I guess a woman who provides free housing doesn't violate the bro code. Got it. In the basement of that pink farmhouse, which was dubbed the murder house, the gang built 3 concrete prison cells in which to lock up and torture wealthy captives, as well as an incinerator in which to eventually burn them. Literally like the set of a nightmarish horror movie. By July of that same year, which was 1993, they were, unfortunately, ready for their first victim. Enter Mia Choy. Now, I just want to mention that all the true names of the victims in this case have been redacted in keeping with Korean policies on privacy, so Mia Choy is not her real name. Mia was walking alone beneath a train bridge in the quiet town of Nonsan, roughly 60 miles north of the pink farmhouse, when the gang pulled up beside her in their car. There was no warning, no time for Mia to even scream. They dragged her into the car and drove off, treating her not as a person, but as prey, another body to be fed into the machinery of their cruelty. Mia was the young daughter of a farmer. She wasn't even wealthy by any means. But it didn't matter in this case, because Mia's only purpose was to serve as a living, breathing test run for future attacks on wealthy people, a disposable life for them to cut their teeth on, so to speak. Once back at the farmhouse, the men took turns raping Mia before the leader, Kim Gi-hwan, strangled her methodically, deliberately, while giving a step-by-step lesson to the others on how to kill a person with their bare hands. He narrated it like a tutorial. That poor girl had to listen to her own death being explained in real time, like she was nothing more than a science project being taught to a board class. After Mia's brutal, tragic death, the gang callously buried her in a shallow grave further out in the already remote area near the farmhouse. Eventually, her remains would be discovered by a farmer picking weeds, but it would be a full year before anyone would learn exactly what happened to Mia Choy. With their twisted quote-unquote training now complete, the Chijon family declared themselves ready to purge society of the corrupt elite by becoming exactly that. Fucking insane rationale. Pop quiz, to just keep things moving here. Before they began picking off the wealthy, what hiccup did they encounter at this stage? A, after purchasing weapons, they spent the rest of their operational budget on matching leather jackets and now had nothing left to pay for gas to fuel the cars with which to abduct victims. B, 21-year-old Kang Don-un, in a moment of absolute pure genius, attempted to microwave their manifesto after adding additional lines in order to make the ink dry faster, which wound up setting the farmhouse on fire. C, 18-year-old Sang Bang-un, who had been serving as the gang's treasurer, went missing along with 3 million won. All right, I'm going to give you a summary because that's what Tank would do. He would do it, he would fail it, but he would do it. I think it's important to do it. A, they blew their money on leather jackets. B, they microwaved their manifesto and set fire to the farmhouse. C, their treasurer fucked off with 3 million won. 2 seconds. The answer is C. 18-year-old Sang Bang-un, who was the youngest member of the Chijon family and was also the serving treasurer, went missing along with 3 million won, which is equivalent to approximately $3,750. He was actually found hiding at a relative's house not far from the torture farmhouse. And let's not forget, avoiding betrayal was a key tenet of their manifesto, right? We killed traitors, sandwiched right after death to the rich, and just before unresolved vagina issues. Ergo, nice, Sang Bang-un was dragged out to a wooded area at the base of the nearby mountains where he was killed with a bullet to his head, execution style. And like Mia Choy, he was buried in an unmarked, shallow grave. Now, for the second half of 1993 and the first half of 1994, little is known about what the Chijon family was up to. I can almost guarantee it wasn't anything savory, and whatever it was, it likely involved poor judgment, bad decisions, and a growing obsession with murder that no one in the group thought to dial back, least of all their fearless leader, Kim Gi-hwan. But thankfully for him, the law would soon catch up. In June 1994, the police initiated an official search for him after his own niece reported that he'd raped her in 1993. So I guess we know what he was up to. Law enforcement located him, arrested him, and sentenced him to 5 years in prison. Unfortunately, The Chijon band did not exactly fall apart in his absence. Instead, 21-year-old Kang Dong-un stepped up to lead instead, making regular visits to the prison where Kim Gi-hwan continued to issue orders, ensuring that the Chijon family's reign of terror would endure. The group's insidious influence persisted, and their next victim was, sadly, already on the horizon. On September 8, 1994, just after midnight, 27-year-old cafe waitress Lee Jong-soo returned to her apartment in Seoul after her shift. It was then that she received a call from the man that she'd been dating who invited her out for drinks. Soon after, he arrived to pick her up in a pre-owned Hyundai Grandeur sedan, a car that at the time symbolized wealth. Remember how I mentioned earlier that lower classes had issues with the Hyundai conglomerates, LG, Samsung, right? So I asked you to remember that. Here's why. It's coming back. Neither Lee Jong-soo nor her boyfriend were anywhere near wealthy. He was a musician and she worked as a waitress. Still, misfortune often has a way of finding its target no matter the situation. While passing the outskirts of the city, Lee Jong-soo and her boyfriend crossed paths with the Chijon family who were out prowling nearby motels hunting for wealthy victims. And I just want to say this real quick. I wish I knew her boyfriend's confirmed name, or at least the pseudonym that he would be referred to in Korean sources so that we could use it and sound a bit more respectful than just referring to him as her boyfriend. But I could not find it anywhere except for one source which referred to him as Lee Jong-won. But since I can't confirm that, I'm just going to be referring to him as Lee Jong-soo's boyfriend. So it was the Hyundai that caught the gang's predatory eye. They proceeded to block in the couple's car with their own vehicles, right? So they put one of their cars in front of Lee Jong-soo and her boyfriend and a truck behind them. They were boxed in. They couldn't drive forward. They couldn't reverse. Then, without warning, the door on Lee Jong-soo's boyfriend's side was yanked open violently, decisively, and in a flash, he was shot point blank with a gas gun and stabbed once in his side. No time to speak, no time to run, just the hiss of pressure and the collapse that followed. A gas gun, by the way, is a replica of a firearm that uses compressed gas to fire plastic BBs, it can be modified to fire blanks or tear gas cartridges. Lee Jong-soo was knocked unconscious as well before she and her boyfriend were both bound, gagged, and loaded onto the bed of the Chijon family's truck. The whole thing took under 2 minutes. The bindings on their wrists were so tight that Lee Jong-soo thought her wrists were going to snap, and the men had also duct taped her eyes shut. After hours of lying on the truck bed beneath large crates with the poor boyfriend bleeding out beside her, not knowing if they were going to survive the ordeal or what was even happening, the vehicle finally stopped moving. The gang ripped the tape off Lee Jong-soo's eyes so that she could be guided into one of the prison cells in the basement of the pink farmhouse. There, she was given milk and bread, which understandably she felt unable to consume. Seeing this as a sign of disrespect or privilege, one of the gang members stated, quote, "You have to know real hunger to know how precious each drop of milk is." Lee Jong-soo and her boyfriend were then separated and interrogated, grilled by the Chijon family who demanded to know where they kept their supposed fortune. To which both Lee Jong-soo and her boyfriend responded by saying, "What fortune?" Once the gang realized that they abducted 2 of their own kind, so to speak, it was already too late to walk it back. In their minds, they'd gone too far. They crossed the line and they burned the map. And so instead of cutting these innocent people loose, the gang doubled down. Because when your ideology is built on blood, logic is the first thing to go. For the next 24 hours, Lee Jong-soo was repeatedly raped by all the gang members as her boyfriend bled out alone on the concrete floor of his cell, hearing and seeing Lee Jong-soo being assaulted and tortured. One of the gang members, Kim Hwang-yang, told Lee Jong-soo that the only way to eventually avoid execution was if she agreed to join the gang, which is very interesting to me because she's a woman, and part of their manifesto is to trust no woman. And while Kim Hwang-yang wasn't the boss, his word carried weight as he'd been there from the beginning, one of the original 3 fucketeers at that grimy poker table on that ill-fated night in early 1993, which meant that his promises were not easily dismissed. But in the Chijon family, mercy was always conditional, and loyalty was often just a slower form of death. At 6:30 p.m. that evening, Lee Jung-soo was removed from her cell. Her boyfriend was laid out on the living room couch after the gang members forced him to drink copious amounts of alcohol until he passed out. Lee Jung-soo was then told that she'd be allowed to live under one condition, that she kill her boyfriend. Then, Lee Jung-soo was handed a black plastic bag and instructed to place it over her boyfriend's head and suffocate him. The gang reassured her that her boyfriend would not struggle, as he was well and good blacked out from the alcohol, and then reminded her that this was her only chance at survival. Realizing that she didn't have a choice, not a real one, anyway, Lee Jung-soo, terrified, traumatized, and heartbroken, placed the plastic bag over her boyfriend's head. Participation by coercion. Her boyfriend was dead within minutes. Lee Jung-soo was then dragged back down to the basement cell while the gang dumped her boyfriend's lifeless body at the edge of a nearby cliff. Then, to tie a bow on this horrific situation, the gang sent his Hyundai sailing over the edge of the cliff, turning his murder into what they hoped would look like a tragic accident. Because remember, right, we're in the early 1990s here. Forensic technology is not what it is today, and they figured the chances of anyone connecting the dots to them were slim. And they were right. 5 days later, on September 13th, 1994, as South Korea prepared for the Chuseok Festival, which is a 3-day harvest celebration akin to a Korean Thanksgiving, that's how it's often referred to, families across the country visited the tombs of their ancestors to clean the area, trim plants, and offer food, drink, and crops as a mark of respect. It was a time for honoring the past and reinforcing familial bonds. But for one family, this night would take a deadly turn for a middle-aged factory known as Mr. So and his wife known as Miss Parker. I'm not sure why they have different last names, but these are the pseudonyms in the South Korean sources, so I'm going with it. After arriving at the Namseol Cemetery, the couple parked their Hyundai Grandeur, which happened to be the same car and model that Lee Jung-soo and her boyfriend were in. From a different car nearby, Lee Jung-soo sat in the back seat. She was now in the Chijon's family car, having been brought to the cemetery and forced to participate in what came next. But she locked eyes with Mr. So from the back of the car. He was there to clean the tombs of his relatives, and in a silent yet intense moment, attempted to convey a desperate warning: run. Unfortunately, her unspoken message was not received. In a terrifying instant, Mr. So and Miss Parker found themselves surrounded by the members of the Chijon family. They yanked the couple into their getaway car while binding and gagging them with brutal efficiency. 12 hours later, they arrived at their pink farmhouse of doom, where the gang began to violently interrogate Mr. So. Real quick, I just want to address something here, because many people may be wondering why Lee Jung-soo didn't run when she was taken into the public. And the answer lies in the terrifying reality that she faced. The Chijon family had made it explicitly clear to her, no matter where she went, they would always find her. They boasted of having eyes everywhere, even inside the police force, and she believed them. This is probably ringing some bells for you. It did for me. This is reminiscent of the case that we covered about Colleen Stan, who during her captivity was told by her abuser, Cameron Hooker, that he was part of a secret organization with a far-reaching network that kept constant surveillance on her. And he made it clear that if she ever tried to escape or seek help, they would find her, and she would meet a fate far worse than she could even begin to imagine. Just like Colleen Stan, Lee Jung-soo knew that running wasn't an option. Her captor's control over her was absolute, and the consequences of defiance were terrifyingly real. So I wanted to address that in case there was any question out there of why she didn't run. Now, back at the farmhouse, the gang explained their motives to Mr. So during his very violent interrogation. They hated the rich, yet they wanted to claim their wealth for themselves. Mr. So, shaken but firm, tried to reason with them and explain that he was not born wealthy. Every won he had was earned through years of hard work, not handed down from a family trust or inheritance. But it didn't matter. To the Chijon family, wealth, however obtained, was a sin, and sin demanded punishment. By the way, it wasn't a sin for them to be wealthy. It was a sin for everybody else to be wealthy. And to them, guilt was a death sentence. But first, show me the money. Threatening to kill his wife and children if he didn't comply, they forced Mr. So to a nearby payphone. Trembling, Mr. So called a business associate and lied, telling him that he'd been in a terrible accident. He instructed the associate to immediately deliver 100 million won to the Gwangcheon bus terminal, emphasizing that his survival depended upon this. Now, somewhere between the pink farmhouse and that bus terminal, something happened. Pop quiz. What happened? A, the car broke down in front of a police precinct because no one thought to fill it up with gas. B, the overwhelming stench of body spray wafting from the car tipped off a checkpoint officer who, upon inspection, discovered bloodstains and scratch marks in the trunk. C, Kim Hwang-yang accidentally blew chunks off his hands with a stick of dynamite that he'd been playing with in the car. 2 seconds. The answer is C. Fucking C. Not only did that dimwit blow chunks of flesh from both of his hands and a decent portion off his face, but the dynamite also blasted a hole straight through the floor of the car. Somehow, the motley crew made it back to the pink farmhouse, trailing smoke, shredded metal, and human gore. 2 hours later, a backup vehicle and a slightly less mutilated lineup of killers picked up the plan and continued toward the handoff point with Mr. So, who was absolutely consumed with fear that the time delay would prompt his colleague to leave the bus terminal, an act that would surely seal his fate. But fortunately, when the Chijon family arrived at the bus terminal, Mr. So's colleague was in fact still there, waiting in his car with a bag full of cash. And as Mr. So climbed into his colleague's car to collect the money, which, by the way, was actually short 20 million won, Mr. So whispered softly, without hardly moving his lips, quote, "I've been kidnapped." So, after driving off with the money in the back of the Chijon family's car, his colleague immediately rushed to the police. But instead of jumping into action, law enforcement essentially shrugged it off and said, "Yeah, not really our jurisdiction," and instructed him to go report the kidnapping to a police department located closer to the handoff location, because nothing screams urgency like bureaucratic hot potato. But the colleague took his marching orders and made a statement at the precinct back in Gwangcheon. But remember now, all this time is lost. He's driving to and from the 2 different areas. At that police precinct, he was essentially met with another disinterested, disbelieving group of officers who felt that this man was just fabricating an elaborate fake story as part of some tax evasion scam. And incredibly, infuriatingly, nothing was done to help Mr. So. After the handoff at the bus terminal and back at the secret hidey hole out in the middle of nowhere, Kim Hwang-yang, with chunks of flesh missing from his idiotic hands, was left behind with a stash of explosive devices and instructed to detonate them if the gang ran into any trouble retrieving the money from Mr. So's colleague. Why anyone thought it was a good idea to trust Butterfingers with more explosives is truly beyond me. While celebrating what they considered to be a successful raid and getting absolutely trashed on beer and a Korean distilled alcohol called soju, the genius crew of bitch-ass boys decided that it was the perfect time to hatch a plan to bust their fearless leader, Kim Gi-hwan, out of prison. Because obviously these cocky assholes are brimming with brilliant ideas. The gang purchased a bunch of burner phones, a refrigerated truck in which to smuggle Kim Gi-hwan out of the prison, while also somehow managing to convince the manager at the local Hyundai dealership to sell them a client list containing the names of 1,200 presumably wealthy people. Ready to proceed with their prison break, the family had to take care of one important item of business first, and that was, sadly, to eliminate Mr. So and his wife, Miss Parker. They went down into the basement and forced both Mr. So and Miss Parker to consume an absurd amount of rice wine until they both passed out on the cold cement floor. Then Lee Jong-soo was forced to descend the basement steps, flanked by members of the Chijon family, one clutching a plastic bag, another carrying a knife, an axe, and a large duffel bag. With one man holding her trembling hands in place, they made Lee Jong-soo press a gun to the backs of Mr. So and Miss Parker's heads before forcing her to pull the trigger. After the executions, the gang then got to work dismembering their bodies, hacking through bone with the kind of detachment that only comes from complete moral erosion, the point at which human life no longer registers as anything more than cleanup. Once the remains were reduced to pieces, they were tossed into the basement incinerator, flesh, bone, evidence and all, fed to the flames beneath the farmhouse. Once the smoke settled, these nefarious numbnuts figured it was the perfect time for a backyard barbecue. So, tables were set and drinks were poured. Skewers sizzled on the grill as guests, including children, gathered on the front lawn, laughing, chatting, and unknowingly sinking their teeth into what had been presented as pork, but in reality was Mr. So and Miss Parker. Prior to serving up human flesh to the masses, the gang had first privately indulged in the cooked flesh while forcing Lee Jong-soo to eat pieces of a liver. Now, I do need to point out for the sake of accuracy that some sources claim the cannibalism angle was exaggerated or sensationalized. But if I were a betting woman, I'd bet it happened. And not just once. So after the barbecue was over, Kim Hwang-yang went in for a hospital follow-up visit as his hands were still a mess from the dynamite debacle. Incredibly, Lee Jong-soo convinced him to bring her along, indicating that her legs were actually badly burned from the same car explosion and that she needed medical attention too. When they arrived at the hospital, Kim Hwang-yang turned to his captive, sitting silently in a crowded waiting room, and said, quote, "If you want to run away, run away." He was that confident in the psychological grip that the Chijon family had on her that he taunted her and dared her, if you will, to leave. Because by then, Lee Jong-soo truly believed that the gang was part of a sprawling criminal network with eyes everywhere, even in law enforcement. So where would she run? In her mind, escape didn't mean freedom. It meant being hunted, recaptured, and returned for torture and most likely instant death. And yet, she decided to risk it. She ran out the back door and flagged down a cab. She got in and yelled for the driver to just go. Somewhere, anywhere, it didn't matter. Just pedal to the floor, go. Noticing that his trembling passenger was clearly distressed, the driver asked Lee Jong-soo if she was okay. Miss Lee, as she is referred to in many South Korean sources, informed him that she'd been kidnapped and that this was her escape. But when the cab driver began asking more specific questions, like who had taken her and where had she been held, Lee Jong-soo understandably panicked. She figured he was part of their criminal enterprise. So she threw open the door of the cab while it was moving and jumped out somewhere random and isolated in a rural farming village hundreds of miles this point from Seoul, which is where she'd been abducted. She had Kim Hyung-young's cell phone in her pocket but didn't dare turn it on, terrified that someone in the so-called network would track her down the moment it pinged a tower. Eventually, she stumbled into a greenhouse and hid beneath a table where the owner found her, burned, shaken, and clearly in flight. Without hesitation, he offered his landline for her to use, which Miss Lee used to call a trusted friend and coworker who was absolutely stunned and relieved to hear from her, especially since her boyfriend had recently turned up dead, the story being that he died in a car accident. So the Chijon family staging his murder as an accident worked. On September 16, 1994, a local farmer then drove Lee Jong-soo the entire way back to Seoul's Gangnam district, where she'd arranged to meet her coworker at a hotel. Her coworker arrived with her boyfriend, the cafe owner where they all worked, and the cafe owner's brother. Okay, so there's a little bit of a group meeting Miss Lee. And after listening to the gut-wrenching, near unbelievable story, they convinced Lee Jung-soo to do the one thing that she was still terrified to do, which was to report the crime to the actual police. Incredibly, though, just like with Mr. So's colleague when he tried to report Mr. So whispering that he'd been kidnapped, the police in Seoul told Lee Jung-soo that she would need to go all the way back to where the crime took place in order to report it to the police in that jurisdiction. Fucking unbelievable incompetency. That's putting it lightly. Thankfully, the cafe owner's brother managed to page a friend of his on his friend's beeper, because this is the 90s, and his friend was a Seoul police officer named Captain Go. This cafe owner's brother told Captain Go everything about Lee Jung-soo. And as fate would have it, listen to this, Captain Go had been reading a newspaper article that very morning while he was on a stakeout about a middle-aged couple who'd recently gone missing. And the moment he heard Miss Lee's story, her abduction, the other victims she described, the mention of Mr. So and Miss Parker, he knew she wasn't just panicking or lying, she was telling the truth. Her story, the way she described this middle-aged couple, exactly matched the couple he had read about in the paper that morning. Lee Jung-soo knew details about this missing couple that had never been released to the public, and despite her disheveled appearance, scratches on her arms, torn clothing, burns on her legs, eyes wide with trauma, what she said was clear, direct, and disturbingly precise. Although the pink farmhouse fell outside his jurisdiction, Captain Go, the fucking man that he is, was granted 24 hours by his chief to follow the lead. He assumed a team of 5 of his most trusted officers, armed them with pistols, and headed out. They drove 5 hours to Bulgat-Myeon, where the pink farmhouse was located, surrounded by quiet fields and low mountains. From a nearby hilltop, Miss Lee pointed it out without hesitation. Kind of hard to miss, the little pink house where she'd been held was right there. She warned them that it wasn't just a house full of sadists, it was a fortress. There were explosives, assault weapons, and men who had long stopped seeing victims and human beings as actual human beings. The team kept watch for 4 tense hours. Then, finally, a man stepped out of the pink farmhouse and climbed into a truck. Captain Go and his team followed that man, who turned out to be 21-year-old Kang Dong-un, and managed to apprehend him. Shortly after, Lee Jung-soo positively identified his mugshot. On September 19, 1994, Captain Go returned to the pink farmhouse of doom, where they managed to apprehend another member of the Chijon family. This time, Captain Go decided to use him as bait. Following instructions, the captured gang member phoned the others and claimed that he'd been in a car accident, was picked up by police, and crucially, had a large bag of cash with him that needed to be retrieved from the hospital that he had been taken to. And the bait worked. Greed won out over caution, because 2 schmuck gang members walked straight into the public hospital, expecting to pick up the money and leave. Instead, they were tackled to the floor by a trio of waiting officers and hauled right off to prison. The remaining members of the Chijon family were still holed up inside the infamous pink farmhouse. Captain Go and his team didn't waste a minute and blew the front door clean off his hinges before storming the house. In a swift, brutal takedown, they overpowered the final 3 gang members and hauled them into custody, dragging the last remnants of the Chijon family into the daylight and one step closer to their reckoning. All of the torture tools were discovered in the concrete prison in the basement, as was the incinerator, which reeked of death and rot. No one could believe what they were witnessing. And once the story broke, it didn't just make headlines, it swallowed them. The Chijon family case became the biggest news in the nation, dominating every front page, every broadcast, every nightmare. The entire gang was paraded in front of media cameras, which reporters ate up, pun not intended, giving these horrible humans the spotlight to make statements which did not convey any semblance of remorse, but rather were completely on brand. For example, Kang Dong-un drove home their cannibalism, while Kim Hwang-yang stated that his only regret was not being able to kill more people, including his own mother. He also informed the world that their ultimate vision had been to attack police headquarters in Seoul before taking over a TV station using all the illegal weapons that they had accrued so that they could broadcast their message to the world before blowing themselves up, which is like, then why did you care so much about obtaining wealth if your plan was just to blow yourselves up anyway? Like, these guys don't make sense. I don't know why I'm trying to make sense of them for us. That's just how my brain works. We can't. They're just idiotic criminals. Needless to say, all members of the Chijon family, including the leader in prison, were found guilty of 5 counts of murder, and all were sentenced to death. But while incarcerated, what happened? Pop quiz. A, all but one were officially reported to have taken their own lives, but given the circumstances, it's far more likely that they were quietly eliminated by prison guards. B, many of the gang members found Jesus and wrote letters to Captain Go, asking him to prevent sinners like them from appearing again. C, a documentary crew tried to interview them in prison, but filming was canceled after one of them bit the reporter in the face, licked the blood off his fingers, and said, "Tastes like privilege." So, A, they either took their own lives or were taken out by prison guards. B, they found Jesus. C, they ate the face of a reporter. 2 seconds. The answer is B. Many of them converted to Catholicism and actually reached out to Captain Go, asking him to find people like them and stop them from hurting people. And you know what? Captain Go actually did just that for about a decade before obtaining his PhD in criminology by writing his thesis on the Chijon family. Captain Go is like the man. He really is. Nearly a year after their capture, on November 2nd, 1995, the final chilling chapter of the Chijon family's reign of terror came to a brutal end. In a grim and haunting display of justice, all the key members of the group were hanged at the Seoul Detention Center. Lee Jong-soo rightfully was not prosecuted for her involvement in the murders, recognizing as any sane person would that she wasn't an accomplice, but rather a victim trapped in a nightmare that she herself barely survived. Incredibly, she went on to live a normal life following this ordeal, which I'm really happy to say. Now, there's not much out there, at least that I could find, in terms of psychological and or criminological breakdown of the perps/gang. So I've taken a crack at creating a condensed FBI-style behavioral profile of the Chijon family based on their real-life actions and psychological patterns. I'm not qualified to do this, so I just want to mention that. I've just drawn from known profiling methods like the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit approaches, organized/disorganized typologies, and socio-psychological frameworks, and I applied them to what we know about the gang. So listen, I took some liberties. Let's see how I do. Let's discuss the overview and group typology. And remember, guys, I'm also just summarizing this so that I don't keep you all here for 3 years. But if you want to stay here for 3 years in the future, let me know, and I will deep dive the shit out of psychological profiles. The Chijon family is a mission-driven, ideologically motivated serial killer group with organized offender behavior and escalating sadistic violence. Although they frame their crimes as class warfare, their actions reveal deep-seated rage, a need for control, and sexual aggression as the true motivations. Despite calling themselves a family, they functioned like a cult, with a manifesto, hierarchy, and codes centered around misogyny, loyalty, and hatred towards the wealthy. These were their primary psychological features. There was delusional justification, right? They framed their killings as economic justice, yet most of their victims were middle or lower class. They had groupthink and cult dynamics, whereby loyalty was enforced through fear, trauma, and violent rituals like rape and murder. Power assertion through violence, right? There was rape, torture, and cannibalism, reinforcing the dominance and control that the leaders had rather than fulfilling any ideological mission, right? If their ideological mission was to just take out the wealthy, why rape? Why torture? Why cannibalize? There was moral disengagement where the victims were dehumanized and seen as symbols of wealth or betrayal rather than people. In terms of the leader's profile, so Kim Gi-hwan, he was the founder and ideological leader who exhibited malignant narcissism, blending grandiosity with sadism. He was manipulative and used his charisma to attract socially disenfranchised men. He showed traits of antisocial personality disorder, including impulsivity and a lack of remorse. He was likely driven by early life trauma, and his ideology masked personal vendettas and feelings of inferiority. I would also venture to say, and I don't even know why I didn't put this in my own little profile here, that Kim Gi-hwan, as well as many, if not most, if not all of the Chijon family members, had serious mommy issues going on as well. Their misogyny, their hatred of women, putting the fact that women couldn't be trusted in their actual manifesto speaks volumes. In terms of their victim selection, they claimed that they were targeting wealthy individuals, but their actual pattern was just opportunistic targeting of those with signs of modest affluence, often with no real wealth. Some victims were raped or mutilated, indicating secondary sexual motivations. In terms of crime scene behavior, we see that they were actually highly organized. Victims were abducted and taken to a fixed location equipped for torture and execution. Weapons, tools, and even an incinerator were methodically used. Post-mortem mutilation indicates both practical and symbolic motivations, such as erasing identity and evidence. In terms of just a conclusion here, the Chijon family was a pseudo-political death cult rather than a traditional crime group. Their stated mission was economic vengeance, but in practice, they used this narrative to justify violence, rape, and torture. Kim Gi-hwan fits the profile of a narcissistic sociopath with cult leader traits, and the group relied on indoctrination, fear, and a violent code. While dismantled, the social and psychological conditions that enabled their actions, economic disparity, alienation, and misogyny, remain as potent threats for the future. The Chijon family came from poverty. They didn't come from one family, we know this, but each one of them more or less came from impoverished backgrounds, raised on the fringes of society, shaped by rejection, resentment, and the quiet humiliation of always being on the outside looking in. They lived in a country where success was measured by entrance exams, job titles, and the price tag on your apartment lease, or at least that was their interpretation of their country. A place where the rich could bend the rules and buy their futures while everyone else was told to just work harder. Their anger wasn't fabricated, it was forged in something real. But, like we always say at Pychopedia Central, we feel for the children they once were who struggled, but not for the homicidal, rapist cannibals they became. Because there's a difference between being failed by a system and becoming the architect of your own cruelty. The Chijon family were not revolutionaries, and this was not rebellion. It was rot, the kind that starts slow, quietly, and then spreads. Because pain that festers without reflection doesn't turn into justice. It curdles into delusion, into control, into cruelty. The gang did not want to dismantle inequality. They wanted to inherit it, to seize the power they believed had been denied to them through terror, through violence, through death. What they built was not a mission, not a movement, but a perverse mirror of the world that they claimed to hate. And maybe that's what makes this case linger. It's not just what they did, it's why they did it. It's the horror of watching a very human rage turn into something so very inhuman. And that is the case. It's interesting because as somebody who is so absolutely fully immersed in the true crime community, both as a fan, listener, and as a creator, I didn't really know this case. It doesn't pop up in too many places. So when I got wind of it, I obviously fell down a rabbit hole and I could not believe that this case was not like on the front burner somewhere for me and that I hadn't heard of it prior to, really just stumbling upon it. So I hope you guys found it as interesting and as fucked up as I do. We're going to circle back to a little discussion about capital punishment because I mentioned obviously that the Chijon family were all hanged. So capital punishment by hanging is a legal penalty in South Korea. It's been around since 1392, which is wild. There used to be other forms of capital punishment in South Korea depending on the crime. This is so interesting. So I wanted to share it with you guys. There was something that was called lingchi, or quote unquote lingering death by slow slicing, which is so medieval. It was reserved for the most severe crimes, while other crimes that were considered warranting clemency, basically, like crimes that weren't as bad but still warranted death, were enacted by forcing the perpetrator to consume a deadly poison. And they essentially would coerce them into suicide. That's how they would often phrase that type of a capital punishment. Really, really, absolutely wild, I think, this whole discussion. But execution served as a public spectacle. It was designed to send a message to the population and to deter, obviously, future crimes through shock and fear. So depending on the crime was sort of, it warranted a different type of death sentence. In earlier times, even, the heads of the executed were displayed publicly, both to warn others and to enforce military discipline. But despite the brutality of these executions, the bodies of the condemned were then permitted to have funeral rites, which is interesting because that is not the case in a lot of other cultures. In February 1998, the then president, Kim Dae-jung, enacted a moratorium on executions in South Korea, which is still in effect at the time of this recording. So that moratorium went into effect really very shortly after the Chijon family were killed by hanging. So it's just interesting. I just wanted to circle back to that topic. If you are still here, I want to share with you a palate cleanser. I don't have a titty because I'm not Tank Sinatra, but I do like to bring happiness, and I do want to leave you guys off on a positive note. So I'm going to do that in the way that I know how, and that is to tell you a story about cash, obviously. So this happened actually 2 days ago. I had a guy over to fix my washing machine, and he was living up on Cashy, which was amazing to see. This guy was like well over 6 feet tall, huge, like burly dude on the floor talking to Cashy like, "Hey, you good boy, look at your flappy ears." It was really, really delightful to watch. All of a sudden, Cashy runs outside. I'm like, that was so rude of him to do. This man is like pouring his heart out. Well, he went outside in the backyard, came back in. His beak was covered in mud because he went to dig up an old cheese stick that he buried at some point that was disgusting and moldy and like half eaten by whatever else exists out in the world in my backyard. But he went and dug it up and gave it to the washing machine repairman as a gift. It was really something. It was a moment, guys. It was a moment. And I hope it made you as happy as it made me at the time. I was like crying. I was so proud of him. That's my Cashy story on the heels of an absolutely brutal case that really checked a lot of boxes that we freaks like to get into. If you guys are still here with me right now, you are the realest of the real ones, and I cannot thank you enough for being here with me right now, keeping me company, especially in Tank's absence today. I hope you loved the episode as much as I did. I also hope that you still enjoy the sound of my voice because you've had nothing but the sound of my voice this episode. So yeah, if you dream and it's in my voice, I'm going to think of that as success. And like I said at the top of the episode, we have so many things in the pipeline, so definitely make sure that you subscribe so that you don't miss any of it, all right? And again, thank you guys so much for being here. I love all of you so much. It means so much to me that you guys listen to this. And I will see you guys next week. Thanks for listening. Bye.